Hello, students. It's me, Menopause Barbie, your menopause tailor. But since we're discussing research day, I'm dressed like Einstein. Believe me, I am no Einstein, but it's fun to dress up and pretend I am. So welcome to Menopause University. This YouTube channel is really a school, and I manage it as such. I cover everything in units in just the right order to ensure your complete understanding. Otherwise, you end up with all sorts of twisted ideas about what's true and what's not. Twisted like a pretzel. And there's nothing more twisted than most people's so-called knowledge on breast cancer and HRT. So here's where we are. Video 356 began our unit on breast cancer. The first 10 videos taught you about your breasts and benign breast diseases. Videos 366 to 377 address the risk factors for breast cancer. Estrogen, progestogen, and estrogen and progestogen together were not on the list of risk factors. So then we addressed the question of whether estrogen, progestogen, or estrogen plus progestogen together cause breast cancer in videos 379 to 382. Well, this is video number 383, and it's about the history of research on HRT and breast cancer. The reason I'm spending so much time on the matter of HRT and breast cancer is because there is just so much misinformation out there. It's the most twisted topic around. My goal is for you to know the facts, not the fallacies. So I'm carefully presenting all the material one video at a time. This video will walk you through the entire history of research studies that have led us to where we are today. And you'll see just how twisted it is. And you'll be able to decide for yourself how you wish to use the information. Now, I love historical analyses. I think they paint a vivid picture of the past in a way that helps us understand the present. So I will present the studies in chronological order, each very briefly, just very briefly. Believe it or not, there are many more studies than you might imagine, so they're all going to be brief presentations. Now, if you're following along in my book, chapter 30 is the chapter on breast cancer. But I did not include this research analysis there that you're going to get here in this video today. To begin, let me say that efforts to understand breast cancer have a very long history, including the effort to discover its cause. And the vast majority of research has studied estrogen, progestogen, or estrogen plus progestogen together with the hypothesis that these hormones cause breast cancer. In other words, the researchers conducted the study expecting it to show that these hormones cause breast cancer. But most have found no association. And despite finding no association, it seems that scientists and society are intent on insisting that these hormones just have to be the cause. Twisted. Now, I have been very careful to separate estrogen, progestogen, and estrogen plus progestogen together. But you will see that the research studies and society generally do not. So I will present the material chronologically in its original, less than organized format. This lack of organization has added to the confusion. So let's talk about the studies and findings to date. It started in the late 1800s with the notion that there might be a causal relationship between estrogen and breast cancer. In 1882, there was a single case of a woman with breast cancer that regressed after post-menopause, making doctors think it had been caused by estrogen. Then, in 1889, doctors observed that breast cancer was less aggressive in older women. So they proposed removal of the ovaries as a treatment for breast cancer, further implying the idea that estrogen might be the cause. After that, in 1895, there was a case of one woman whose breast cancer regressed after removal of her ovaries. And in 1896, it was noted that another woman with metastatic breast cancer had lived for 12 years after removal of her ovaries. So everything known in the 1800s came from single cases. And most of the cases involved older women beyond the age of postmenopause. Now, this was because back in those days, most women died before becoming postmenopausal. It wasn't until the year 1900 that women started to routinely live past the age of postmenopause. Well, this increased longevity prompted the development of hormone replacement for postmenopausal women. This was because it was obvious that postmenopause was a state of estrogen deficiency. I, Einstein, wasn't the one who figured that out, but I should have been. It was just so logical then as it is now. Of course, all hormone deficiencies are treated with replacement of the missing hormone. So why should estrogen deficiency be any different? Well, in 1942, the first estrogen replacement product called Premarin was put on the market. So doctors gave it to all women when they became postmenopausal. In 1966, this book, Feminine Forever, was published, and it promoted estrogen replacement as the cure for the tragedy of menopause. And with that, by 1973, the use of Premarin quadrupled. But this was before doctors knew that estrogen alone, without progestogen, caused endometrial uterine cancer. And in the 1970s, when it was discovered that progestogen prevented endometrial uterine cancer, progestogen was added to the estrogen. But the lingering thought was that if estrogen caused endometrial uterine cancer, might it cause breast cancer too? So in 1986, a study was done that showed no significant increase in breast cancer for women taking Premarin. And in 1987, the consensus was that there was no overall increase in the risk of breast cancer with Premarin. Then, in 1988, 2 more studies showed no association between estrogen and breast cancer. And the following year, in 1989, a study showed that even women using estrogen after having a breast biopsy for suspected cancer had no increased risk of breast cancer. But that same year, 1989, one study suddenly claimed that HRT increased the risk of breast cancer by 440%. How twisted is that? From no increased risk to a 440% increased risk? That's just ridiculous. This alleged increase in risk was merely a result of the fact that the researchers expected to find only 2.2 cases among women taking estrogen plus progestogen, but they found 10 cases instead. And because their actual findings did not match their expected unexpected findings. They blamed the difference on estrogen plus progestogen together. This is one reason why research findings can vary so much from study to study. Instead of just doing the study with no expectation of the results, scientists sometimes think they know everything before they do the study. And when the study results don't match their expectations, they blame the hormones. However, in this study, they found no increased risk at all with estrogen alone. The authors admitted that their finding of a 440% increase with estrogen plus progestogen was not statistically significant. I think they knew it was completely twisted. And they acknowledged that estrogen users had a better prognosis than non-users. Nevertheless, this one study became the lead article and cover story in the New England Journal of Medicine. Twisted beyond belief. Even though it was admittedly flawed, this was the only study all doctors heard about. I'm appalled. And in 1991, another study again showed no increased risk of breast cancer among Premarin users. And later that same year, an analysis of 28 studies showed no association between estrogen and breast cancer. So what we had thus far was study after study after study, none of which showed any association between estrogen and breast cancer. And of all the studies, the only one that was sensationalized was the one that produced outrageous, almost laughable results. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Twist, twist, twist. Then, in 1992, the first randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial was conducted. And it found that 11.5% of women who took the placebo got breast cancer, whereas none of the women who took HRT got breast cancer. So this led to the recommendation in 1993 that all postmenopausal women take HRT. In 1995, a study showed that HRT was not associated with an increased risk of breast cancer, and that using it for 8 or more years actually reduced the risk. Also, in 1995, the Nurses' Health Study showed that women who had ever used HRT had no increased risk of breast cancer, even if they'd taken it for more than 10 years. Well, those researchers were really full of themselves. They expected and wanted to find an increased risk of breast cancer with HRT. So they were very dissatisfied when their results proved them wrong. So, the researchers of the Nurses' Health Study reanalyzed their data because they were intent on finding an association between HRT and breast cancer. Tisk, 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 twisted. Reanalysis of data means shuffling things around and looking at them from a different angle than the one planned for the study. In other words, it's manipulation of the data. Einstein would never do such a thing. So by manipulating their data, they found a small subgroup of women with an increase in the rate of breast cancer. But the increased rate of breast cancer was limited to women who took HRT for only 5 years. This relationship did not exist for women who had taken HRT for more than 10 years. That's not critical. This was the first instance of what is called data mining in research. Only twisted researchers do that. Data mining is when researchers fail to find the associations they expected or wanted to find. So they go back and rummage around with the data or adjust how they analyze it in order to prove themselves right. This is a very anti-Einstein thing to do. These so-called scientists who think their own theories are more correct than actual science just astound me. In 1996, a study found that women who had ever taken estrogen had a lower risk of dying from breast cancer. And the following year, a study showed that taking HRT resulted in a longer life expectancy of 3 years. In 1997, it was shown that HRT was not associated with an increased risk of breast cancer among women with a family history of breast cancer. And that same year, a Lancet collaborative analysis of 21 countries showed no increase in breast cancer in women who had taken HRT in the past, regardless of how long they had taken it. But because these researchers were also dissatisfied with their results, they set out to reanalyze their data and find a subgroup that showed an association between HRT and breast cancer. Data mining again, tisk, tisk, tisk. Horrible. I do believe that this improper scientific conduct is enough to make my hair turn black again. Once again, pay attention here. Notice that over the 1800s and 1900s, study after study after study showed the same thing. No association of HRT and breast cancer. And now, you have scientists that are determined to show a relationship. And when their initial data doesn't show the relationship they desire, they find a way of analyzing their data so that it does. This is a shameful and ever more common trend in the world of research. It's one of the main reasons you feel so confused by conflicting data. Sometimes researchers have ulterior motives. But, as Einstein, say, logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will take you elsewhere. Overall, the 100 years of the 1900s were all consistent in showing that HRT did not cause or increase the risk of breast cancer. By the year 2000, there was an overall consensus that estrogen did not increase the risk of breast cancer. Then, in 2002, everything started to change. Enter the WHI. In July 2002, there was a press release announcing that the National Institutes of Health had discontinued the estrogen plus progestogen arm of the Women's Health Initiative, WHI, due to an increased risk of invasive breast cancer. There were two arms in the WHI study, the estrogen plus progestogen arm and the estrogen alone arm. This estrogen alone arm continued after the estrogen and progestogen arm ended. Now, this one study turned the world upside down to an extent that warrants a separate video all to itself. So next week, I'll discuss just that one study. But for now, I want to keep things in perspective by looking at all the studies. So after the WHI findings shocked the world in 2002, the Million Women study came along in 2003. It reported an increased risk of breast cancer in women taking estrogen or estrogen plus progestogen, but only in current users. There was no increase in past users, no matter how long they had taken it. How can that be? It's completely illogical. I've never heard of anything so twisted. But this was yet another instance in which the researchers reanalyzed their data to find a relationship that didn't really exist. How can they even call this research? If scientists already know the answers to what they're studying, it shouldn't be called research now, should it? In 2005, a study showed that women with the BRCA mutation who took estrogen alone or estrogen plus progestogen together after removal of their ovaries had no increased risk of breast cancer. Next, in 2006, a study found that HRT users were less likely to get breast cancer than non-users. And in 2006, the second arm of the WHI showed that there was no increased risk of breast cancer in women who used estrogen alone. In 2016, another study replicated the findings that estrogen was associated with a significantly decreased risk of breast cancer, and that women with the BRCA1 gene mutation who took HRT had no increased risk of breast cancer. Since 2016, the overwhelming majority of studies have merely confirmed what early studies revealed and what you've learned thus far in this unit. Estrogen alone decreases your risk of breast cancer. Estrogen plus progestogen together may increase your risk of breast cancer depending on whether you take it in a cyclic regimen or a continuous regimen. The continuous regimen increases your risk very, very slightly to a degree that is not at all significant. The cyclic regimen increases it a little more, but still to an insignificant degree. I have been known to define insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's precisely what these researchers have done in their efforts to study HRT and breast cancer. If you ask me, what's needed are more studies comparing the rates of breast cancer in women taking estrogen plus progestogen in cyclic regimens and with women taking estrogen and progestogen in a continuous regimen. Because that seems to be the only consistent, logical, and reliable variable, regardless of whether you study real-life situations or research subjects. But that's just my opinion, and who am I to know anything? Of all these studies, the one that has disrupted the lives of women and confused the medical community the most is the WHI. The 2002 media reports of the WHI were among the most upsetting in the history of medicine. Ever since 2004, the WHI has been studied over and over and over again. And despite the fact that you've never heard about any of these subsequent studies, most of what scared you from the initial media reports has been found to be completely bogus again and again. This is why I want to dedicate the next video to it. You deserve to know the whole story and the whole truth. There is a phenomenon called theory-induced blindness. Theory Theory-induced blindness is when you have already accepted a theory, and then you use it automatically to shape your thinking. If an observation doesn't fit, you stick with the theory and adjust everything else accordingly. Theory-induced blindness is something that I, Einstein, never had. The mere idea of it causes me to want to turn over in my grave. But that's precisely what some of these researchers had. They mined their data to find a relationship between HRT and breast cancer. So the history of research studies on HRT and breast cancer is fraught with all sorts of twists, and that brings you up to date with the research on HRT and breast cancer. Are you shocked that there are more studies than you realize and that they go back so far? What you've learned today is that for as long as we've been studying the effect of estrogen or estrogen plus progestogen on breast cancer, the overwhelming consensus is that there is no relationship. And notice that nobody has bothered to study the effect of progestogen alone. That's why it's an area of great unknowns, as I explained in video 381. Now, I presented 24 studies here today, and only 4 of them even hinted at a relationship between estrogen or estrogen plus progestogen and breast cancer. One of the 4 was admittedly inaccurate, and the other 3 only came up with the association by mining their data. The 3 studies that did so were the Nurses' Health Study, the Women's Health Initiative, and the Million Woman Study. Science was never designed for twisting evidence to fit your preconceived and misconceived beliefs, but that is what has happened in these instances. The problem is that the twisted results make for such a good news story. And for most women, that's their only source of information, the news. So given these 24 studies spanning 2 centuries, would you rather manage your menopause and the rest of your life according to one sensationalized study that reported dishonest results and refutes all the other studies? Or would you rather have the whole truth and the whole story so that you can make a decision that seems logical to you? Unfortunately, most women are using the single most twisted study of all time. The biggest driver of women's misconceptions about HRT and breast cancer is the infamous WHI study. So that's our topic for next week. I hope these broad overviews of the research findings help you realize why you should never, ever rely on a single study or on the latest study. Every study is merely one little piece of a great big puzzle. It is never the whole story. It is never the final word. No study gets to be the Bible. We don't have Bibles in research, so don't utilize any study as if it's the Bible. For every study that claims one thing, you can find another one that claims the opposite. Nowadays, people cite studies, send links for studies, and request studies to support their opinions. That needs to stop. Not only do most people have no experience whatsoever in actually reading a study, they also have no idea how to analyze one. Studies have as many flaws as people have. They're full of shortcomings and limitations, and no matter what any study shows, it didn't study you. So please be careful in acting on studies. I'm Einstein, and that's my advice. You should know that I have no agenda. I just want to present all the facts so that you can decide for yourself. Because this is one area that governs a lot of women's management choices for menopause. And it's just a shame that they are making those management decisions with faulty information. So come back in a week to learn about the WHI. If you ever just want to take a shortcut and get what you need personally from this education, a consultation is the way to go. It's the only educational resource I offer that can tailor everything specifically to you. You can schedule one at menopausetailor.me. Subscribe to all my stuff and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Stories. Bye, my dears.